The containment cell's lights never dimmed. Vex had counted 19,417 cycles of meals since they'd stopped bothering to simulate night and day. The constant illumination was carefully calibrated, bright enough to prevent her from hiding any movement from the observation cameras, yet not quite intense enough to cause physical damage to her violet-hued skin. That calibration wasn't kindness. It was preservation of a specimen. Vex curled tighter into herself in the corner of the stark white room, 7 feet tall even in this hunched position, her scaled arms wrapped around knees that bent backward compared to human joints. The thick ridge of spines along her back scraped against the wall, sending a dull ache through her body. Once, these spines had shimmered with the bioluminescent patterns that made the Thanari such feared warriors, now they remained dark, dimmed by captivity and despair. Through the observation window, white-coated figures moved, their voices muffled by the thick barrier. They never spoke to her. Never acknowledged that she could understand them perfectly. For 3 years, they'd maintained the fiction that she was an animal, a savage creature too dangerous to engage with directly. Neural activity still elevated during sleep cycles, a woman's voice filtered through the intercom they thought she couldn't hear. Recommend increasing suppressant dose by 7%. Approved, came the curt reply. Vex didn't react. She'd learned long ago that any response to their conversations only led to more tests, more scrutiny. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the transparent barrier, letting her triple-lidded eyes unfocus until the scientists became mere blurs of movement. When the door to the observation room hissed open, she barely registered the new arrival, another human in the endless procession of watchers. This one was taller than most, with shoulders that hunched slightly as if uncomfortable with their breadth. Dark hair fell across eyes that, unlike the others, looked directly at her rather than at the monitoring equipment. Elias Novak, he introduced himself to the lead researcher. New environmental systems tech. They sent me to check the atmospheric regulators in all containment areas. Dr. Westfield barely looked up from her data tablet. Fine. Just don't disrupt the specimen. It's been showing agitation patterns all week. Vex watched through lowered lashes as the newcomer, Elias, moved to the control panel adjacent to her cell. Unlike the scientists, his movements lacked the stiff precision of fear. As he worked, his eyes kept returning to her, not with the clinical detachment she'd grown accustomed to, but with something that made her spine ridges twitch involuntarily. Curiosity. Concern. When the others filed out for their midday meal, leaving only automated surveillance, Elias remained. His fingers moved across the control panel, and imperceptibly, the harsh glare of the lights softened to a warmer hue. The change was slight, not enough that others would notice upon return, but enough that the perpetual ache behind Vex's eyes eased for the first time in months. She raised her head, meeting his gaze directly. A forbidden interaction. Elias didn't flinch away as others would have. Instead, he held her gaze for 3 heartbeats before returning to his work, a subtle acknowledgement that passed between them like an invisible thread in the sterile air. When the meal tray came through the automated delivery slot later, the usual tasteless nutrient paste had a small addition, a piece of fruit, vibrant orange against the gray tray. Vex stared at it, then at the cameras. Such deviation from protocol was unprecedented. Through the observation window, Elias was adjusting something on a maintenance panel, his back to the other returning scientists, his posture giving nothing away. But Vex knew. This small act of recognition, of her as a being worthy of pleasure, not just sustenance, was his. As she reached for the fruit, feeling its unfamiliar texture against her scaled fingertips, something long dormant flickered in her chest. The spines along her shoulder blades gave the faintest phosphorescent pulse before dimming again. The cameras recorded it all. But only Elias, glancing back as he prepared to leave, seemed to understand what it meant. In a facility designed to study a monster, someone had finally seen a person. 3 days passed before Elias returned to Vex's containment area. He'd been careful, too careful to risk daily visits that might trigger suspicion. The research station orbiting Proxima b was governed by protocol, and Protocol 7a explicitly forbade unnecessary interaction with the Thanari specimen. But necessary was a matter of interpretation. Environmental systems check, he announced to the single researcher monitoring the morning shift. Dr. Harlow barely acknowledged him, engrossed in analyzing neural scans from the previous night's observations. Vex watched from her corner, shoulders slightly less hunched than before. The orange fruit had been the first fresh food she'd tasted in years, sweet and sharp and vibrant against the bland sustenance they provided. She'd savored each bite, licking the juice from her scaled fingers long after it was gone. A small rebellion, but hers alone. Elias moved methodically around the observation room, checking gauges and readouts, his path bringing him gradually closer to the communication panel near the containment barrier. When Dr. Harlow stepped out to retrieve comparative data from the lab, Elias moved swiftly to the control panel. "The humidity settings in your cell are wrong for your physiology," he said softly, voice pitched just loud enough to carry through the specialized acoustics of the barrier. "I'm adjusting them. Should help with the dryness in your scales." Vex went perfectly still, her tripartite pupils dilating in shock. 3 years of silence, broken by simple words of consideration. "They don't know I can understand your language," Elias continued, fingers moving across the controls while his eyes remained on the door. "I studied xenolinguistics before engineering. The patterns in your subvocal resonances match documented Thenari communication structures." A warm mist began to fill the cell, delicate and barely visible. Vex's skin drank it in immediately, the constant itch of dryness fading for the first time since her capture. Her throat worked silently, unused to forming words after so long. "Why?" she finally managed, her voice a rough whisper. Elias's hands stilled momentarily at the sound. "Because what they're doing here isn't research. It's cruelty masquerading as science." The door hissed, signaling Dr. Harlow's return. Elias smoothly transitioned to adjusting an adjacent control panel, nothing in his demeanor suggesting the boundary he'd just crossed. Each day that followed, he found reasons to return. Brief moments alone with the monitoring scientists, tiny windows where words could pass between them like contraband. "My people are not what your kind believes," Vex told him on the 5th day, voice growing stronger with use. "The war was built on misunderstanding. We don't harvest minds, we share consciousness temporarily. It's how we learn." "I know," Elias replied, replacing a filter that didn't need changing. The military twisted the narrative to justify aggression. Easier to exterminate what you fear than understand it. By the 12th day, Vex had moved from her corner to sit closer to the barrier when Elias worked. Her spine ridges had begun to show faint bioluminescent patterns, subtle blues and purples that shifted with her emotions. "You were a soldier?" she asked, noting the precision in his movements, the watchful awareness that never fully left his eyes. "Former Colonial Marine Corps. 15 years. Elias kept his voice neutral, but she caught the tension in his jaw. "I saw enough to know when I was on the wrong side." Director Schaefer noticed their growing proximity. Twice he questioned Elias about extended maintenance in the Thenari containment sector. Twice Elias produced immaculate technical justifications for his presence. But suspicion grew like a shadow. "They're increasing my suppressants," Vex whispered one morning as Elias arrived. "I can feel the difference. They've noticed the change in my bioluminescence." Elias frowned, checking the medication dispensary logs. "They've nearly doubled the dose. This could damage your neural pathways permanently." For the first time, a flicker of true fear crossed Vex's features. Not for herself, but for the fragile connection they'd built, the first thread of trust woven between their species in a generation of conflict. That evening, alone in his quarters, Elias accessed restricted files on his personal data pad. The Thenari Physiological Database, the security protocols for the containment cells, the station's emergency procedures. Information accumulated like weapons in an arsenal. In her cell, surrounded by unrelenting light and the hum of monitoring equipment, Vex pressed her palm against the transparent barrier. On the other side, only emptiness answered. But for the first time since her capture, the darkness inside her had been pierced by something dangerous and fragile. Hope. Maintenance override initiated. Containment barrier temporarily deactivated for emergency systems calibration. The computerized voice echoed through the observation room, now empty of researchers during the station's night cycle. Elias had chosen this time carefully, the skeleton crew manning other sectors, the surveillance relying more on automated systems than human eyes. Vex stood at the center of her cell, spine ridges flickering with anticipation and trepidation as the previously impenetrable barrier between them dissolved with a soft electronic hum. "We have 17 minutes before the system logs the maintenance duration as abnormal," Elias said, stepping into the containment area, the first human to willingly enter her space without armed guards or sedation protocols. They stood 3 feet apart, the air between them charged with the impossible intimacy of proximity after weeks of barriers. Vex towered over him by more than a foot, her violet-scaled form made more striking by the gentle luminescence now flowing freely through her spine ridges. "Your eyes," Elias murmured. "They're gold at the center." "And yours change with the light," she replied, leaning closer. "Blue-gray like the oceans of my world at storm." His hand lifted hesitantly, hovering near her arm without touching. "May I?" The question itself was a revolution, permission requested rather than specimens handled. Vex extended her arm slowly, the scales along it rippling slightly with nervousness. Elias's fingers made contact with feather-light precision. Warmth radiated from the simple touch, his skin so different from hers, soft where she was textured, fragile where she was armored. Yet the gentle exploration of his fingertips followed the patterned scales with appreciation rather than clinical detachment. "They told us your kind couldn't feel," he said quietly. "That Thanari nerve endings were primarily defensive, incapable of registering positive sensations." A bitter sound escaped her throat. "They told us humans had no empathic centers in your brains. That you were clever animals who evolved technology before compassion." Their eyes met in shared understanding of how conflict breeds convenient lies. When his hand reached her wrist, she turned her palm upward, enveloping his hand in hers. The size difference made his gesture of trust all the more striking, her clawed fingers could snap bone with minimal effort. Instead, they cradled. "I was a temple guardian," Vex said, the words spilling forth as if physical contact had unlocked sealed memories. "Before the war. We protected the consciousness archives, generations of experience stored and shared. I wasn't a warrior until your kind destroyed our southern temple complex." Her luminescence shifted to deeper blues, patterns that spoke of mourning in the Thanari emotional language. "I was stationed on the colony planet when that happened." Elias's voice roughened. "They told us it was a weapons facility. I transported the strike team that," he stopped, the weight of complicity heavy between them. Vex's free hand rose to his face, the gesture so unexpectedly tender that he startled slightly before leaning into the touch. Her palm curved against his cheek, claws retracted completely, a deliberate choice that spoke volumes. "Your kind took everything from me," she whispered. "And yet here you stand, the first one to give anything back." The monitoring system chimed a warning, 12 minutes elapsed. They spoke faster then, exchanging fragments of lives lived on opposite sides of a conflict neither had chosen. His childhood on Earth's last green continent. Her training in the consciousness temples. The battle that led to her capture. His disillusionment and transfer to research division. When their time dwindled to seconds, Elias pressed something into her palm, a small data chip. "Hide this," he whispered. "It contains language files, station schematics. Information you should have." As the barrier reactivated between them, Vex clutched the chip tightly, concealing it within a natural pocket beneath her forearm scales. Their eyes held contact through the transparent wall, something unspoken but undeniable passing between them. Later that night, as the station hummed with reduced activity, Dr. Harlow reviewed the evening's monitoring data. The containment logs showed a routine maintenance cycle, but something about the specimen's readings afterward troubled him. Elevated neural patterns. Increased limbic activity. And most concerning, organized thought structures in areas previously suppressed by medication. He flagged the file for Director Schaefer's immediate review. In her cell, Vex viewed the data Elias had given her, absorbing knowledge through the specialized optical receptors in her palm, an ability her captors had never discovered. Station layouts. Security protocols. And personal logs that revealed Elias's growing conviction that the research being conducted wasn't just unethical, it was based on manipulated data designed to prolong the conflict between their species. For the first time since her capture, the bioluminescent patterns along her spine shifted into the royal purple of determination, the color of a Thanari who had found her purpose again. The emergency klaxons began at 0347 hours, their wailing cutting through the artificial night cycle of the research station. Elias bolted upright in his quarters, the automated warning system already cataloging catastrophic failures throughout the facility. Station integrity compromised in sectors 7 through 12. Coolant system failure in primary reactor housing. All personnel evacuate to emergency shuttles immediately. He knew instantly what had happened. The experimental engine modifications Director Schaefer had been pushing through safety protocols, the ones Elias had warned would destabilize the reactor cooling systems. No one had listened. Chaos erupted in the corridors as personnel scrambled toward evacuation points, clutching whatever personal items they could grab in the precious minutes before reactor failure. Elias moved against the flow, shouldering past panicked researchers. Novak. Dr. Harlow grabbed his arm, face pale beneath the emergency lighting. Wrong way. Shuttles are in Bay 3. I forgot something important, Elias lied, shaking free. I'll catch the next evacuation group. But Harlow's eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. The specimen. You're going for the Thanari. His hand moved toward the security communicator at his belt. Director Schaefer ordered containment protocols to remain in effect during evacuation. She's too dangerous to. Elias moved without thinking, his military training taking over as he delivered a precise strike to Harlow's solar plexus, then caught the man as he collapsed, dragging him into an empty lab. He'd wake with a headache, but he'd live, which was more than could be said for anyone left behind when the reactor went critical. 4 minutes later, Elias reached the containment sector. The security doors were sealed, emergency protocols locking down hazardous specimens during evacuation. The ultimate failsafe: if the station was lost, anything deemed too dangerous would be lost with it. Through the observation window, he could see Vex pressing against the barrier, her luminescence flashing in agitated patterns. She already understood what was happening. "I'm getting you out," he shouted, knowing she could hear him through the specialized acoustics. He jammed his maintenance override into the security panel, bypassing the first layer of lockdowns, but the containment barrier itself remained active. "Elias," Vex's voice came through clearly. "The reactor housing is failing. You need to evacuate now. Not without you." He attacked the control panel, rerouting systems, trying to force the barrier to disengage. A violent tremor shook the station, throwing him against the wall. Overhead, support beams groaned ominously as the station's structural integrity began to fail. "System override denied," the computer announced. "Biometric authentication required for hazardous specimen release during emergency protocols." Director Schaefer's authentication. Impossible to obtain now, she would have been among the first evacuated. "Go," Vex urged, pressing her palm against the barrier. "Our time together has been a gift. Don't waste your life." Another explosion rocked the station, closer this time. The lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, the groan of tearing metal echoed through the corridors. A section of ceiling collapsed in the observation room, pinning Elias's leg beneath a support beam. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to free himself. Through the haze of agony, he saw Vex's expression change from concern to fierce determination. "Stand back from the barrier," she commanded. "It's reinforced thermosteel," he gasped through the pain. "Nothing can." But Vex had already closed her eyes, her spine ridges now blazing with brilliant cobalt light. The bioluminescence intensified until it seemed to pour from her entire body, concentrating into pulsing patterns that resembled complex mathematical equations. This was what humans truly feared about the Thanari, not their physical strength, but their ability to manipulate energy fields through concentrated neural projection. The very ability that had been suppressed with drugs throughout her captivity. The barrier between them began to vibrate, molecular bonds destabilizing under the assault of precisely calibrated energy waves. With a sound like shattering glass, the supposedly impenetrable barrier disintegrated. Vex moved with fluid grace, crossing the space between them in 2 strides. She lifted the beam pinning Elias as if it weighed nothing, her enhanced strength another gift of her species. "Your leg is broken," she assessed clinically, already tearing strips from her simple garment to create a makeshift splint. "We need to reach the auxiliary shuttle bay," Elias said through gritted teeth as she worked. "The main evacuation routes will be gone by now." Another explosion, much closer, sent tremors through the floor beneath them. The station's automated voice had taken on a strained quality, as if the AI itself understood the gravity of their situation. Critical reactor failure imminent. 5 minutes to catastrophic containment breach. Vex lifted Elias into her arms, cradling him against her chest with surprising gentleness despite her imposing form. Her eyes met his, gold centers blazing with determination. "Guide me," she said simply. They moved through collapsing corridors, Vex's natural night vision navigating the increasingly darkened station as primary power systems failed. Twice they encountered sealed bulkheads, and twice Vex's energy manipulation opened a path forward, though each effort dimmed her luminescence, the toll on her body evident in her labored breathing. When they finally reached the auxiliary shuttle bay, a grim discovery awaited them. Only one emergency pod remained, and its systems were damaged. The navigation system was offline, the life support operating at minimal capacity. For minutes to reactor containment failure, the station AI announced dispassionately. Elias dragged himself to the pod's control panel, fingers flying across the interface. I can bypass the navigation system, use manual controls, but the radiation shielding is compromised. One of us will need to remain in the unshielded compartment. Their eyes met in shared understanding of what that meant. No, Elias said firmly, seeing the decision forming in Vex's expression. Your physiology can't withstand radiation exposure any better than mine. In response, Vex's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a deep, resolute violet, a color he had never seen from her before. Part 5, Beyond Boundaries. The emergency pod tumbled through space, its system straining under the electromagnetic pulse from the research station's spectacular demise. Through the viewport, debris scattered like dying stars against the black canvas of space. Inside the cramped vessel, Elias regained consciousness slowly, the pain in his splinted leg a dull throb beneath the effects of the medical kit's analgesics. His first coherent thought was of Vex. He found her in the unshielded rear compartment, separated from him by an internal barrier that was a cruel mirror of her former captivity. She lay curled on her side, her magnificent height folded into the too small space, spine ridges pulsing with weak lavender light. Vex. He pressed against the divider, panic surging through him. The radiation. Her tripartite eyes opened slowly, focusing on him with effort. My species evolved, on a planet with 3 suns. Radiation resistance is part of our biology. Each word seemed to cost her, but her mandibles curved in what he now recognized as a smile. Not immunity, but enough. Relief washed through him, though concern remained. She had absorbed a massive dose while protecting him from the station's death throes. Even with her natural resistance, the effects were evident in her dulled scales and labored breathing. The NAV system is still offline, he told her, checking the pod's damaged controls. But I've managed to establish a distress beacon on a neutral frequency. We're drifting toward the trade routes near Barnard's star. Someone will find us. And then. The question hung between them, heavy with implications. A Thanari warrior and a human deserter, neither would find easy welcome in their respective societies. Elias moved his hand to the divider. On the other side, Vex's scaled palm met his, separated by mere centimeters of transparent material. There's a settlement on Europa, he said. Independent colony, mixed species. They don't ask questions about where you came from, only what you can contribute. The emergency lights cast soft shadows across Vex's features as she considered this. My people have a saying, the path walked alone leads only to death. The path walked together leads to understanding. Then we walked together, Elias said simply. For 3 days they drifted, conserving the pod's limited power. Vex's condition improved gradually as her remarkable biology worked to repair radiation damage. They spoke for hours, no longer in hurried whispers but in the measured tones of those discovering each other fully. She told him of Thanari art forms, symphonies of bioluminescence that entire communities would create together. He described Earth's oceans, the play of light on water that reminded him of her spine ridges. On the 4th day, their distress signal was answered. A Terran Centauri trade vessel, captained by a grizzled woman who raised an eyebrow at the odd pair but asked no questions when Elias offered his engineering expertise in exchange for passage. Europa's 2 weeks' journey at standard drive, Captain Okafor informed them, leading them to cramped but private quarters. You'll work for your keep, both of you. For the first time since her capture, Vex stood among others without barriers, without restraints. The Centauri crew members eyed her warily at first, but curiosity gradually replaced fear. By the end of the first week, a young engineer had approached her with questions about Thanari energy manipulation principles, their conversation evolving into an impromptu cultural exchange that drew an audience. In their shared quarters, the transformation in Vex became more evident each day. Her spine ridges now displayed constant, shifting patterns of blue and gold, colors Elias learned represented contentment and affection in the Thanari emotional spectrum. Her movements became more fluid, the rigid posture of captivity gradually replaced by natural grace. The first time she touched him without hesitation, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw as they spoke of the future, Elias felt something fundamental shift between them. In the temples, she explained softly, we had a ritual for those who chose to bind their lives together. Not merely as mates, but as connected minds. Her luminescence rippled with vulnerability. Such connections were rare between our own kind. Between different species, unprecedented. Elias caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his face. I've spent my life following precedents that led to nothing but conflict. I'm ready for unprecedented. That night, they discovered new languages of touch, the textures of scale against skin, the geography of bodies so different yet harmonious in their differences. Her bioluminescence enveloped them both, creating patterns that responded to their shared rhythm, building toward a synchronized glow that left them breathless and transformed. Europa's domed settlements appeared on the viewport 2 weeks later, artificial structures glittering against the ice moon's surface. As they prepared to disembark, Elias received an unexpected transmission, a message bounced through multiple relays to obscure its origin. What is it? Vex asked, noting his expression. Research data from the station. Someone else must have had doubts. He scanned the files quickly. Evidence that our species' neural patterns are compatible, not adversarial as the military claimed. Proof that the consciousness sharing your people practice isn't invasive but symbiotic when consensual. Truth, Vex said simply, her hand finding his. A beginning. They stepped onto Europa's surface together, an improbable pair facing uncertain welcome. But as they walked toward the settlement's gates, Vex's luminescence shifted to brilliant gold, visible even through the garments Captain Okafor had provided. A passing Alcyonian child pointed in wonder, tugging at its parent's tentacles. Pretty lights, the child burbled in the common trade language. Vex knelt, bringing herself to the child's level. With delicate control, she sent a small pattern of light dancing from her fingertips, a simple greeting in the Thanari tradition. The child's delighted laughter drew others, curiosity overcoming initial wariness. As a small crowd gathered, Elias watched understanding dawn on their faces. This was no monster from propaganda holovids, but a person with gifts to share. You see. Vex said softly, rising to stand beside him. Fear divides. Wonder connects. Elias took her hand openly, their fingers intertwining despite their differences, his 5 to her 7, skin to scale, softness to strength. Together they walked through the gates of the settlement, carrying the first threads of a new understanding between their peoples. Not in grand diplomatic chambers or battlefield surrenders, but in the simple recognition of personhood once denied. In small kindnesses that broke the cage of fear, setting them both free.